Well, hey everyone. So I'm in lovely Des Moines, Iowa today because I'm going to be speaking at the DevOps Days Des Moines sometime soon, which I think will be fun. And I thought what I would do, if you remember last time, I did a rehearsal of a presentation that I'm going to be doing, and why not do that now? Because last time I think I was 20 minutes over, which is a lot of minutes. Maybe even more. I'm not sure. So I went through and I cut out some stuff and rearranged some things. On the long flight over from Amsterdam, I had some other formatting stuff. So today I'm going to go over the presentation. We just recorded a software-defined talk podcast episode. If you're really interested in seeing the live streaming, we actually recorded on Wednesdays and published on Friday. So you can find software-defined talk here on YouTube and go check that out. I figured I got all my gear set up here. I should just go ahead and do it because if I don't do it now, I'm going to not want to do it later. That's something you can take home as a life hack for yourself. But since I'm doing this remotely, it's going to be a little bit not as fancy. I guess. I don't know. It's probably fancy enough, right? So I'm just going to share my desktop here, which hopefully will work out well. Let's see. Let me load up our slides here, and I'll switch over to that just a moment. Let me go to remote. See, you can see my OBS setup, which you're probably not interested in, but let's instead go over this way. So let me share this here, and listen, I'm going to have to check. I think we're still broadcasting A-OK. Maybe even You can see me watching myself. Switch over that just a moment. Sorry for the futzing around. Let me go to remote. Yeah. So you can see my OBS setup. Now you see I'm watching myself. Blowing your mind. But anyways, let's jump into it. And then whenever I post this, I'll have to go to it. Let me just note the time. It's 4:34. This is how I... one of the annoying things about coming up with a new talk is you have to rehearse it. The great thing about giving the same talk over and over again is when you give it, you're rehearsing it for next time. So you don't really ever have to rehearse it that much anymore. But I don't really know the flow of this talk since I've never given it. But I am giving it next week at a conference in Berlin, so that'll be nice. Now I've talked long enough that I should really say it's 4:35. 4:35 p.m. Central U.S. time. All right. Well, thanks for coming to my talk. I wanted to go over, I don't really know if this title works, but we're at DevOps Days, so you got to have some kind of fun title for it. But my idea is that maybe instead of trying to make big changes and do a lot, we should make small little incremental things that go over to kind of get us to improve the way we're doing software, to get us having DevOps in place. And as I'll get into, I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I feel like... I don't know, we've been talking about the same thing for quite some time, or bringing the message to a new generation of people. And we've even started to rename a lot of the DevOps stuff we've been doing, and things come and go. I don't know, maybe it's a bit of an old guy sort of thing to be like, you kids today and your new stuff. But as someone who has been involved in this community and I guess in my job, try to give people advice about it, I think I've narrowed down how to get the benefits of DevOps. That's what we all want. We read the DORA reports. And after talking over, 8-10 years with probably hundreds of large organizations and even more people, I've finally come to realize, I'm going to give you the summary of my whole presentation here in case you want to go out. How you get the benefits of DevOps is you just actually do it this time. I think is the key to success with it. But let me get into the details of that. But before I do, hello, this is me. I'm Coté. I was a programmer a long time ago. There's a picture of an award I won at my last programming job. It was great. I found that in the shed of my the house that I rent out in Austin a while ago. It's always fun to get an award, but boy, it would have been cool to get an award that was that tall of a stack of $100 bills. $1 bills probably would have been good too, now that I look at it. But I've been around for a long time, starting in the 90s doing programming and all sorts of places. Now I work at VMware by way of Pivotal. But if you're interested in, if you end up being interested in this or you want to do more, I've got a great newsletter you can subscribe to. All sorts of other stuff, whatever. But I'm also a recovering thought leader. I think I've come to that realization over the, I don't know, maybe the past even 60 days or so, as I've been trying to sort out what's happened over the past couple of years and what I enjoy doing and things like that. So, as part of my ongoing therapy, I'm trying to kind of crystallize. I think of all of the thought leadery stuff going on, like what the valuable stuff is, and that's kind of worth focusing on. Kind of what I and I think us collectively have learned over the years. So the first thing that I think is kind of good priming for a lot of I don't know what I'm thinking about at the moment is I feel like these two phrases have at this point maybe done more harm than good in our sort of IT community here, right? Now you've got your famous software is eating the world thing, really a way of sort of just like emphasizing the importance of software and giving this urgency that you really need to revolutionize the way that you're doing software. And I'm not sure that like same urgency, I don't really know if it was actually healthy in the beginning, and it definitely is almost a false sense of urgency. And also like don't let software eat you, like eat software, right? Like the message is important, but I think we need to kind of get over the weird bravado of it. And then there's the one that's a favorite of the DevOps world, because of course it invokes good old dimming, right? And that is that you don't have to change; you're just going to perish, if you will. And I think what I find frustrating and always have, to give myself credit about this phrase, is like, yeah, but like give us some help. Right? Like if we're not changing, the people who are going to be affected are individuals. The executives and people at the top generally will be fine. But like we should figure out how to help organizations change, not just like, use some Darwinian stuff to sort it out. And again, as with all these phrases, it's the way that you use them and the way that you think about them is really like what you need to keep an eye on. So, the other thing that I think is useful in the DevOps community, especially to pay attention to, is this notion of you build it, you run it. Which, if you've seen Andrew Schaefer give kind of the talk he gives nowadays, he'll go over why this was widely sort of misapplied. Because what's hidden underneath that is that at the time Amazon had a fantastic platform, a bunch of infrastructure on there that allowed the application developers to not have to build all of that infrastructure in that platform. So we've got these three phrases, I think, that keep in your mind, because I think they're big phrases in the DevOps world. I don't know if this one is really working as far as whatever, but I'll think about it. Let's see, opening bad phrases. Maybe I'll just take these out. Just take out? Probably. But, I mean, I think it's a great point to make. But, so as with a lot of the thinking that we have, I think kind of what I'm going through as far as figuring out actually do it this time is like, let's also get the phrasing kind of clear and concise and not just sort of leave people behind with it. Probably taking these out is a good idea. So to that end, here are like the things that I've been trying to write down, right? And I started writing this down, well, for this presentation, but I started thinking about all of this stuff. Every couple of years, there's sort of like things that you start hearing at DevOps Days over and over again. And the new one is every time I hear about coal miners or dimming, I start to get a little foggy in my head, because I know we're going to be kind of going over a proof of doing yet again the same thing over and over again, right? Like if it's, you got your coal miners and your socio-technical systems, and when you allow them to determine how they do the work, as we'll get into, things work out well, which I think we know. Or, you have your dimming stuff like whatever, everything is in there. And it's great to learn about this stuff. But it gets a little disheartening that we have to like constantly be coming up with new ways of going over it and telling people. So I wanted to kind of start writing down what the actual conclusions are, regardless of if they come from coal mines or other places, so that you can kind of just like start with that. And I'm not going to have time to go over all of these, but I think it's a good, well, because I came up with it, I think it's a good start at like, if you want to do DevOps or just get better at software, here's kind of what it's going to look like if you're interested in that approach to doing stuff. So, like, how did I get to this point? Well, the way it started, right, and this is part of the kind of recovering and the ongoing therapy that I give myself is, I started off a long time ago at Redmuck back in 2006 or so. They really hired me as the first analyst that James and Steve hired there. It was great. I was very much so into technology, right? Like, I really like studying technology, talking about it. It's what would consume, let me note this down, this transition. What I need to do is transition to my job, clanks. Because what I have to do is establish like a disillusionment. Need to first establish disillusionment, because you can see it's kind of like jarring to go from what I was just doing like back into biography stuff. So maybe I should start with the unhelpful phrases and then introduce myself. Let's try that. Start with unhelpful. Actually, though, I'm gonna actually axe that. So start with TLDR joke, then long list. Like, these are the details. These are the details. Then to bio. Okay. In fact, let me just start that all over again. You can see, let's see if this, you can see some editing here in action. So that's good. What I'm going to do, I really like these slides, but we're going to get rid of them. We'll hide them. That's the compromise. If you're editing a deck and you really don't want to delete a slide, you can just hide it. And that's like, you still get to see it because you love it so much, but you can not actually worry about it. So then we come here. Yep. Yeah, okay. I think that'll work. Okay. Let me note the start time here. So that was, let's say 8 minutes, which is still way too long for that. But new start time is going to be 4:45 p.m. And again, I have an hour allotted to me. It would be great if I could do this in like 50 minutes. 40 minutes would be even better, because if I know I can do it in 40 minutes, I'll give myself time to just like waste, so to speak. And you can see I've already axed out one of the things here, but let's get back to it. All right. So, well, thanks for having me here. It's always great to come speak at a DevOps Days. I think DevOps Days are fantastic because, unlike the big, gigantic conferences out there that not everyone can go to, you have these regional DevOps Days, and like, if you have enough of them across the world, everyone, so to speak, ends up going to them. I was just talking with someone about that today, that I think they're much better to have like DevOps Days style regional conferences than big, gigantic ones. Or, both is always nice. Anyhow, I was just trying to come up with a cheesy phrase for this this thing I've been thinking about over the past 12 months or so, which is like, I feel like we've had way too big ambitions in wanting to improve the way that we do software. And when you look at a lot of the conversation about how to get better, how to do DevOps, or all the other new words that it like, they often like set very unrealistic goals. And I ended up talking with people who have kind of like gone off the deep end. And it's stressful. So I've been trying to think about like, how could we like do less? Like, what's some way to kind of pull back from doing that? So, to give you the summary of when I've talked with organizations a lot, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here, like who are successful at doing DevOps or successful at improving how they do software, the ones who are struggling with it, I've kind of concluded, and the whole rest of the presentation I'll talk about this, is the way that you're successful, the way you get the benefits of DevOps is to actually do it this time, right? Like, you've heard the same advice over and over again. Then I go talk with people and they know what they should be doing, but they really are not doing it. So like they should do it. That's kind of all that I have left to say at this point. However, I did manage to come up with at least 14 other things to say, which I'm going to go over. This is kind of the details of the actually do it this time. And I'm not going to be able to go over all of these, but I want to highlight some of the major ones, because I think like if there's probably additional ones, but there's a few just like ways of thinking and doing software and managing the infrastructure for it, that I think if you actually just follow those things, then you probably will get the benefits of doing DevOps or whatever else. So, hello, I'm Coté. I've worked in the software industry for a long time. I work at VMware now by way of Pivotal. I worked there for a long time when we were acquired by VMware. If you're interested in more of this stuff, once you see it, I've got a newsletter that comes out several times a week. I cover all sorts of stuff in there. It'd be great if you would subscribe. That's really the only reason that I do anything publicly nowadays, is I want people to subscribe to it. So as they say, engage with my brand. You can see I started off in programming a long time ago. The last place I worked was at BMC Software. In this space, it was a nice sort of launch into doing DevOpsy stuff. See, I'm 2 minutes in. That's pretty good. I'm going to say 2 minutes at me slide. Not so bad. Let's I've had a really good fortune in my career to get to where I am today. You could kind of say that I do like thought leadership stuff, but I think I've realized that I've got a bit of a turn here in what I've been up to and the way I've been thinking. And that's like, I think I'm a recovering thought leader at this point. I think I've kind of like gone over the hump of it and maybe even gotten a little disillusioned. And so a lot of what also is going on in me kind of figuring out what should be going on here is kind of dealing with that disillusionment. If you will, welcome to my ongoing therapy session to think through this stuff. Now, it's good to know how it started, right? Like, how did I get to this point of being a recovering thought leader? And after I was doing programming, it really started with the first non-programming job that I had. Being an analyst at RedMonk. Hopefully you've heard about them. If you have this notion of developers being a king-making, that comes from Steven there on the left. He's got a great book on that. Or if you know the RedMonk developer, the RedMonk Programming Index, that's good. They're great analysts. They've got like I think maybe like 3 more analysts at this point, and some other analysts have come and gone. But I worked the first 5 years or so of my thought leadership life there, and it was wonderful. It was this great opportunity. That I still don't really believe it happened. It was really nice to work with them back then. And I went on to do all sorts of other things. I worked in M&A and was an analyst again somewhere else. But then I ended up at Pivotal, thanks to my buddy there, Andrew Schaefer. And it's been really nice being in the thought leadership business, right? I get to travel the world. I work with all these great people. You can see the team that I'm on there. I meet all the people, get to be friends with them, chat with them on the road when I see them. I've done podcasts, series with them. I wrote several little booklets, or I have written several little booklets. You can see I've got a great moderately famous podcast where we talk about all this tech stuff. And, all of this beneficial stuff is really driven by this like real dedication that I have to following the tech world. I mean, for as long as I can remember in my professional life, it's just like what I think about at night, like what I'm interested in is understanding what the new things in tech are, how they're deployed, how they're used in organizations. Nowadays, like for the past 10 or so years, not so much the technology, but how new technology is used to change the way organizations work. And it's really been my obsession, and it's really brought me to this point. All of these great benefits that I've had. It even part of this whole process is I even got an expat assignment in Amsterdam, and we moved the whole family over there. You can see us. This is when we landed back August 1st, 2018. We brought all of our stuff, and we still live there to this day. We thought it'd just be 2 years, and it was 3, and now it's 5 or so. So, there's been all sorts of fantastic benefits to it, and it's really been nice. But recently, like, as I mentioned, like I've started to get a little like, I don't really know what's going on, a little disillusioned about this. Things seem kind of weird. And I think like I've been trying to diagnose what's going on there. And I think there are, among many things, getting older is often a cause of just like getting grouchier. If I remember, let's see, we're at 4:51 now. That's pretty good at how it's going. So there you are, 6 minutes in. I think this clip is working more or less well. And I think there's 3 things that have kind of like pushed me, 3 main things that have pushed me down this path. Now, the first, of course, is everyone experienced the pandemic or COVID or whatever, which was actually like part of it was great. We shifted to doing a lot of video. You can see I do a lot of like executive dinners where you get a bunch of people together, executives, and you talk about things. But we had to shift all of that to online, and I actually did an event where we tasted. I ran tasting Nutella on various things. There's always one person in the group who liked putting Nutella on olives. This is in Europe. People are very familiar with Nutella there. But I did all sorts of interesting video stuff. I think I did some great work during that. But it changed the nature of thought leadership, the nature of being at conferences like this. Part of being in my role is that you travel a lot. And you kind of build up relationships with people that you see on the road, like that Willie Nelson song. And when you cut back that travel, and it doesn't really come back, it really changes basically your set of friends and your social group, your identity, a huge part of your life. Now, the other thing that happened is our friend Kubernetes here. So at Pivotal, we actually were not an early on supporter of Kubernetes. We had something called Cloud Foundry, which is still used to this day very successfully, very widely by lots of large organizations. It was basically trying to do Heroku for the enterprise based on the open source Cloud Foundry, and it was great. Like it was a fun. It's a fun thing to talk about. It's got a great community. It works. But Kubernetes came around kind of totally strategically out of left field, and it really, like, for anyone who was not Kubernetes during the container wars, which the victors always hate to call it that, but it very much felt like wars about container orchestration and things. So it came along and basically just kind of wiped out kind of a lot of the hopes and dreams that everyone else had and really replaced what was happening there. So, I think it's generally a good idea at this point all these years later, but it really did start to disrupt what a lot of people in this container area and the platform area were doing, including myself. Just kind of like 5 years of my career and the work I've been doing there, just like, see you later, is a little bit of what happened with that. And then recently, the third thing that happened, and I think maybe this community can feel sympathetic to that, is like this notion of platform engineering came about, and it's declared that DevOps is dead. And as I have done a lot over the past year, when something new came up, like you read about platform engineering, and you're like, I think you're just adding like a better version of Atlassian on top of this, but we've done all this stuff. But there really is, it's not only the people talking about platform engineering as something that is sort of like creative destruction about DevOps, but really what's kind of upsetting about it is the huge interest in it from the users, from the community, right? Like it's all people seem to talk about. And it's kind of like, it does make one wonder, like, what have we been doing in the DevOps world that this phenomena has emerged, that this isn't just more evolution of DevOps? So you add all these three things together, and you can see that, like based on what I've been doing for a while, I kind of like look at it, the community, and I kind of look at what I've been doing in it, and I think like, what am I doing here, right? Like it doesn't seem like what we're doing collectively is helping, because we keep telling people just to do the thing, right? Or maybe I'm just poor at it, but whatever, the kind of feeling is the same. I also came across this thing in some reference, which once you kind of get in this state, right? Like, so you think about most of my career where a huge part, the majority part of my identity is based on all that stuff that I was going over, right? Like it's based on of extreme interest in the tech world, what's going on there, talking about it, meeting with people, like the communities that I align myself with, on and on and on, right? And so if you are associated with that kind of thing and these disruptions, so to speak, happen, then you start to get kind of shaky. And I think it really like proves out this notion that I've heard about a lot over the years, this work-life balance. That like you don't want to tie up your identity to your work very much because you don't have much control over it, right? And you're going to end up, there's a high chance that you'll end up in kind of a sad spot with it. But I finally understood this only in the past month, maybe even month and a half or so, when both of my kids were very interested in playing Dungeons and Dragons, which it used to be before tech, back in junior high or middle school. That was my all-consuming passion. Like, it's what I thought about all the time and what I wanted to do. I had a great group of friends. And, and them too, listen to my Texanism sprouting up when I get on this side of the Atlantic. When those two wanted to start doing it, I dove back into it and relearned there's all sorts of new systems since Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. I forget what I used to play. But I just am obsessed with it. I'm thinking about it right now. And the way that I want to evolve the world they're doing and what's going on there as I look at this picture. But it really gave me something new to obsess about, almost this feel of a new part of my identity, or as people would call this, a hobby. And it really has been sort of therapeutically great, because I have something outside of this Gatling gun sort of identity that I've had to kind of want to do and identify with. And yeah, it's super nice. It also made me realize that what it means to be a workaholic, right? To associate yourself, to identify yourself with the work that you have, and to kind of establish that unhealthy relationship. Better to have a healthy relationship playing a fantasy game with your children. So that brings me to why I really want to start just sort of writing down stuff like this, right? The things we know that are true but we don't do, right? Because I feel that's all that I can really go over, is just to kind of remind people and try to be as clear as possible about what works, right? And conversely, what doesn't work. And these are the 14 things that I've come up with so far. And, it might be a little obvious, but based on the years of conversation that I have with people, even though it's obvious, people for some reason aren't doing it as broadly as they should be doing it. So let's go through the things, right? So I mentioned this one a little bit, and these are kind of ordered in importance. Not really. I haven't taken that pass, but I think the first two I think that I'm going to go over are more or less the most important things, right? And the first one is an operational thing, right? And I've started thinking about this a lot when the coal mining conversations come up, which is I think we've known for a long time that the way to get the best results is to go to the people who are doing the work and have them figure out how to do it in the best way, as opposed to having a centralized sort of planning and centralized way of directing the way that people are doing this. And definitely in IT and in software development, you want the people writing the code, the team of people, not just writing the code, but the people who are on that team, the product managers and others, kind of deciding what gets done. And to give you an example of that, this is an example, I get to use this clip art with this guy with this great hat. And it really illustrates this point that there was a team. I interviewed a person who was that worked on this team a while ago, and they were working in a commercial kitchen thing, that you hire an organization to deliver your food and also run the kitchen for you. And that organization wanted to improve the way the business was running, so they wanted to optimize it. And eventually this trickled down to IT, that what they needed to do was they needed to digitize the recipe books. So the recipe books were shipped out as paper and 3-ring binders. And the thought was that when we do our digital transformation, they should be on tablets, and that will allow us to send out new recipes more frequently. It'll make it better for people to follow those recipes and make sure that they don't deviate from it. We'll have a lot more control over how the kitchen is run, and it's, doing kitchens at an industrial scale is kind of like that. So there's this centralizing, telling the development team what to do. But it turned out when the development team actually went into the kitchen and they studied what the staff was doing, one of the major problems the staff had was manually going around and measuring the temperature of mayonnaise and chicken, right, for health inspectors. So instead, the team switched over to that as what they were doing, and they addressed the toil. There's lots of analogies to SRE Think and DevOps stuff. They automated work that was being done because that team was closer to the actual work, and they decided what to focus on. And that instead increased the productivity of the kitchen staff. It made their health inspections go better. So the people doing the work the people who are closer to the work had more direction over what the work was, which is we know that's going to be the case. So that's the most important thing if you're improving how you do IT is have you asked the people doing the work how they think you should improve it? And that's what's up with the coal miners and all these other people and lean manufacturing people that we talk about. And there's another great example from last year at DevOpsDays Dallas where someone who actually does lean manufacturing and process was consulting with a corn distribution company, and they've got this picture here of one of the first things they did is they took the president of the company and they had them go work on the line, sorting through the corn. And as he said, the boss made immediate changes on that first day, right? Like because he was doing the work and he was experiencing what worked and didn't work, he instantly knew how to improve it, right? Whereas, you could just ask the people doing it. He became one of the people, right? So this is something that comes up year over year, over and over again, is have the teams have that autonomy. And, if you're struggling with improving the way that you do software, the first thing to ask is, are the teams doing the work determining how the work would be done? Are people even asking them, how would you improve this work? Or are they being told from a center of excellence that this is how you do DevOps? Read this book and implement it. And I think most people I talk with, they haven't really figured out this balance of autonomy in their organizations. You can see I forgot to advance through the slide thing there, but whatever. So the other thing, and I pose this in let me see, it's 5:01, and I'm at this, so that's about 15 minutes in, which is pretty good. The pace is pretty good here. So the other thing that is on my list here, hopping to number 3. I should do the Casey Kasem voice going for number 3 on the charts, but I forget what he sounds like, which is kind of sad. If things aren't going better for you, you've launched your cloud migration plan or your digital transformation or your DevOps initiative, and you still feel like things are not working out well, then it's probably good to go back and read the manual and figure out if you're following the steps, my jokey thing of actually doing it this time. And I think the chief thing among those is thinking about how you've automated your deployment process, your pipeline, right? And you can go all the way back to October of 2007, where Jesse Robbins, if I have his last name right, I'm terrible with names. He published this in O'Reilly, right? And this kind of launched the whole automation, and I think arguably the DevOps world, along with all sorts of other stuff. But it was a good chart that kind of summarized a lot of stuff. It was used a lot at the time. And what it was showing is that operations, if you automate things, you can actually get faster deployment cycles. And therefore, at your startup, where you're doing a SaaS or you're doing software, you're going to have a lot more opportunity to learn and deploy and get stuff out the door, right? At the time, being a startup was all about getting features out the door faster. There used to be all sorts of Twitters and Facebooks and things out there. Now, first of all, one thing people miss a lot with this is it's the secret sauce for startups, not 50, 100-year-old companies or enterprises, if you will. They have a whole bunch of different secret sauces. And what's good for a startup is not always very good for a large organization. But the spirit of it back in 2007 definitely applied. And it's sort of like, that's what we're shooting for, right? Like that was kind of the goal of the Scotty and Spock thing of Allspa and the other guy back at Velocity. So how have we been doing with that, right? I like to check in on this, like how fast are our release cycles? And it's really hard every year to get a read of what that is. And I think, as with all surveys, it's based on who answers the survey questions, right? So as you kind of look at each of the surveys, you can see that those communities that would be interested in answering those surveys, kind of what their release cycles are. And here I've just picked monthly or less, right? Like the ultimate thing we've been shooting for in DevOps is deploying multiple times a day, right? Like, I don't know, maybe you don't need to, but it's a good metric that we were really going for. Tens of deploys a day, or someone like Booking.com does thousands of deploys a day, which that's a conversation for another time. But as you look at this, like from the Dora perspective, things are going great. But then you go on to the other end and you look at Forrester surveys and things are not so great. Now, when I'm working with large organizations, not startups, I am more interested in what the analyst shops have to say, because I feel like the people they survey are more in the large enterprise organization than the ones that answer Dora questions, right? Like analyst shops like Gartner and Forrester get criticized for being fuddy-duddies and laggards and things like that, which sounds a lot like most large organizations that I talk with. And I mean that in a good way, right? Like you're going to get a lot better sense of what's going on if you work in a large organization looking at a Gartner or Forrester survey than if you go look at surveys of organizations that are already in the future, right? So I tend to think, I don't know, you can call it 50%, you can call it 70%, But we, at this point, are still not putting in place the tools. We're not reading the manual to know that if you want to get better at software, the first thing you need to do is automate your pipelines, right? Or whatever you want to call them. You can see that we're not there yet, right? And, digging a little further, this survey doesn't get published anymore, but I used to, as you can see, collect every year the Agile survey. And you can see this is about tool usage or putting in place continuous delivery, or the other one, deployment. I don't really care what the difference is. I'm sure it's important. And then also continuous integration, which is just more like automating a build. And two things you should notice about this chart. Automating your build has been pretty level for a long time. Again, surveys are surveys, blah, 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 whatever. But if you think of data as the plural of anecdote, then they start to be kind of useful for like confirming or unconfirming your intuitions. But you see that we've kind of been stuck at the same level for automating our builds, our pipelines, for quite some time. And we're even worse at doing continuous delivery. But you see it start to creep up over the years. However, we're going to need to automate more builds before we can do more CD, right? So we should be right in the middle of people kind of wanting to automate their deliveries, but they don't have build automation in place, which is kind of weird, right? So, I look at all of these, and the summary that I get to is we're really not like reading the manual. If we don't have, automated builds in place, then like, let's just start with that. Never mind all this other stuff. Do you have a build pipeline that's automated? Do you have CI/CD in place? And start with that, and then consider serverless. Or then consider like multi-cloud or all these things, right? Because you're going to need that anyways, right? Like a lot of you're going to have it. So why don't you just work with what you have, but actually get CI/CD in place and see if that helps out? Which kind of gets to the danger of urgency, of false urgency that you'll have. I'm also thinking, let's see, at this time I'm 5:08 in, which is still good. But also if I reduce out those quotes, I'll free up even more time. So I think I'll be totally good. So this is not really like a technology thing, but it's very much so kind of like the way you need to engineer and take care of your mind when you're considering changing the way that you do IT. And this is one of the things as a thought leader you have to contest with all the time is like, when am I overhyping something, right? When, no matter what I think of it or how successful it is in the cases that I know, I might be kind of going over the edge with the urgency of this quite a bit. And this is something that all of us in the thought leadership business, we kind of probably still participate in. But we definitely used to do this all the time, especially kind of in the 2010s and the later part of then, is we had this change or die mentality, right? Like, we had that survival is not mandatory sort of situation. It's kind of like a smirky little thing we used to do. But I think, you've got to watch out when you yourself fall into this change or die urgency mentality and when people are talking to you about it. So this is a chart. These are charts we used to like to use a lot, right? When we would go talk with people, I use these all the time. And what these charts are showing you is that the average lifespan of an enterprise, a big company on the S&P 500 has reduced over time, right? Which the implication being there that you don't want to be a Blockbuster or a Circuit City, right? You don't want to be disrupted. Or, you don't want one of these tech companies coming in and stealing your bacon or whatever, right? Now, I don't know. This is kind of an interesting way of looking at things, but I think I've gained a better perspective that, like, it's not quite as change or die and freaking out as it needs to be. And that is with some hindsight about thinking about like, oh, all these startups are going to come in here and destroy things, or like you've got to move all your stuff to public cloud or your fuddy-duddy. If you look at, as Benedict Evans did here, you collect together some CIO surveys, you see that we are constantly in what I jokingly call the eternal first inning of cloud, right? So whenever you hear one of the public cloud people talking about how far are we into cloud, every year they say that we're still in the first inning for a long time, right? Now, the other side of that is every year you can see that for a while now, CIOs have said that like, oh yeah, we're going to be moving all of our stuff to the cloud in 3 years, right? Like we'll be moving our stuff, but it's really flattened out, right? Like there's not, we've kind of stalled out with what's been moving there, right? Now contrast this with like this idea that everything's going to be in the cloud, and if you don't migrate everything, it's kind of unfortunate this only goes up to 50%. You have to imagine a 100% chart here. But whatever. But you can see it's not only flattened out, but like actually there was some urgency, but it wasn't this change or die sort of mentality. And I think, the other area that comes up is in banking, right? This is definitely something that you can see me doing it here. I guess this is 8 years ago, back at DevOpsDays Austin, when they were in that lovely theater. I'm probably wearing the same shirt when I present this, which is a testament to that shirt. But, all these fintech startups were going to come in and just utterly destroy banking. But at the time, you can even see that the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, was aware of this. And he was like, yeah, so we're not going to let that happen, right? Like, we are going to get better at software. We're going to make sure that we can respond to this kind of thing. So there is a bit of change or die there. It's sort of like just know what's happening and respond. But I think what we don't appreciate about that is that, like, well, of course, that's what they do, right? Like, you don't have to freak out that much about it. And to this day, I go and talk with a lot of these banks, and it's not like they're 100% running in public cloud. They're not all, like, using service meshes and serverless, right? And they're actually doing fine. And I think a large part of that is something totally out of the bounds of technology. Like, when I talk with my friends and coworkers who used to work in banking about this, they point out that what happened with these fintechs, among other things, is that once you reach like the, 200 million, 300 million kind of deposits range, I forget the scale, you encounter the real bottleneck of banking, which is regulations, right? Like in banking, technology is great, but really what's great is like to deal with all the regulations you have to build trust. And that becomes a headache and a big problem. That is a big competitive advantage, a moat that existing banks have and insurance companies, is they know how to deal with that. And if their software, to kind of mangle up a mythical man-month thing, if their software is not good, it's because they're usually complying with governance and regulations. Now, they could be doing better at that, but that starts to be the real thing to focus on, not that like, we have this technology that we need to put in place. So the point being that like, once you start hearing this urgency about we should be using this new technology and we've got to shift to it, it's good to kind of like go through that case of banking and go through the case of public cloud and not so much dismiss someone who's saying you should do something new, but calibrate on the urgency of it, right? And this gets back to my idea of like, how do we get mentally comfortable with DevOps? How do we have DevOps life balance so that we don't kind of get to this disillusioned state where, we're upset that we haven't gotten better at things after all this point. So exactly to that point, one of the tactics is to slow down and try to be a late adopter of technology. Now, if you know the diffusion of innovation curve, even the word late, like using a technology once it's been proven to be stable and widely used is not thought of great. Like being a late adopter is kind of a pejorative term, right? It's better to be an early adopter, right? To be in the earlier part of the diffusion of innovation. Now, to give you a brief little education, if you don't know about the diffusion of innovation curve, it's a great tool when you're thinking about technology. I mean, if you're making technology decisions, you should definitely know this. And also the hype cycle is kind of another version of this. But I mean, like all smooth curves, you should be instantly suspicious of the validity of this thinking, but it's just a model to kind of like help you think through stuff. But it posits, the diffusion of innovation curve deposits that for any new technology, you can kind of chunk out the adoptions and the life cycle of adoption like this. Early on, you have people who are very excited about a technology. They will put up with anything to get it installed. They'll even kind of have negative return on investment, right? It might be more hassle than it's worth to get it up and running, but they're just interested in it. And that's a vital part of an innovation of a new technology because they're figuring out the kinks, they're working things out. And then that shifts over to the early adopters who they've learned a little bit from those people and they spend less time dealing with it. but they're getting the advantages of being the first movers, the people to use that technology, right? Kind of like that secret sauce of automation, right? And then eventually the difficulty is getting into the mainstream, right? And then you get into like the majority of people who adopted some more stable technology. It's more well known. You have kind of like winnowed out all the competing technologies, and you get to the ones that are useful there. I mean, we're kind of in that stage now with public cloud. There's basically 3 vendors. It's very well understood. It's not really risky. And you can have most of the people using it or familiar with it. And then you have the laggards who are just like, they're the ones who, like, when you have to renew your life insurance, you still have to print out a PDF and fax it to someone, or do some ACH deposits or something like that. But my thinking here is that it's better to be a late adopter of technologies, at least in the kind of like the majority phases, if you're in a large organization, because you don't want to be like the guinea pigs, the kind of free labor of experimenting and co-developing that technology, because you're going to encounter all sorts of problems. And you might also just pick the wrong one. Out of like 40 different options, you might pick the one that didn't win, like in the container wars there. Now, this is a lot different if you're trying to find the contradictions. I mean, we could, in the Q&A, I could probably go through here and find all the contradictions in what I'm saying. That's, that's fine. It makes it more enjoyable, but it's different than saying like, oh, we should be a late adopter to CI/CD. I mean, I think if you look at the history of CI/CD all the way back to cruise control in 2001, and kind of going through Hudson and Jenkins and all of that, like, it's been around for a long time, right? Like, there's a difference between being a late adopter and being stubborn, right? And not having that in place. So, like, don't take what I'm saying here to mean that you shouldn't have your CI/CD in place, because it's high time that you've gone through that. But the example more recently historically that I give would be Kubernetes, right? So I experienced this, if you remember the old Gatling gun thing there, in that early on when Kubernetes was coming up, it was what everyone wanted to do. It's all anyone would talk about, and it very much so took all the oxygen out of the air for doing alternatives to it. And if you look at the surveys that we've had recently, this is from our State of Kubernetes surveys. We've done about 5 of these over the years. You can see that as Kubernetes is entering more and more of the mainstream, the benefits for developers, shortening developer cycles, are going distressingly in the wrong direction. It's only in the past year or so that they've gone back up in the right direction. Hopefully, we'll see what happens this year. Hopefully, it keeps going in the wrong direction. But like the ability to shorten your software release cycles, which again, you may not need, but it's a good indicator of how good you are at software and the stack that you're having. For a while, it was going in the wrong direction. And I attribute this largely to a couple of things. One, as Kubernetes was going across that diffusion of innovation curve, more and more people are using it. You didn't have those early adopters and those kind of innovator people who would put in the time and deal with all of the little picadillos of using it, right? Like, they're people who just wanted a tool that worked, but they were compelled to use this instead of being a late adopter of it. And also, you can see in another survey question that finally the development team is starting to not be in charge of Kubernetes, which I think is incredibly beneficial. Like, that's something that we misunderstood early on. Let me think here. Yeah, the other thing I'm going to do is cut out these slides. I like the way that worked out. Well, I don't know. Let's go with it. Because, it's bad for your application developers to do this, because you realize with Kubernetes, as Torsten's recent, just one slide out of many, is actually a very small part of the overall stack that you have, right? So if you begin with just Kubernetes, you still have to build out all this other stuff. And once you have your application developers dealing with that, like, they're not doing applications anymore, right? So, and also, the other important thing that, again, the benefit of being a late adopter is you get over this issue. Now, we in the vendor world and the thought leadership world, we like to use this as a bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt and FUD. But I think this is actually incredibly valuable for the point that Kubernetes has been in a long time is you want to have as much innovation as possible across the stack. And so you actually do want this situation early on where you have all sorts of ways of solving for this problem here, right? Like all these boxes have multiple ways of fitting in there and kind of layering on top of Kubernetes to do it. It's great, right? But as you go through that curve, you winnow this stuff down. They might still exist, but there's often only like 2 to 3 things that are just the default choice to have, right? And if you're adopting this technology early, you do indeed have to do what we FUD about, which is like you go through the stress of selecting and also integrating all of this stuff together, which I think leads to a lot of that frustration and consternation I've definitely seen around Kubernetes over the past 5 or so years. I mean, hopefully things are improving and getting better, and I'm pretty sure they are. But if you adopted doing this like 5 years ago, you had to put up with a lot of stuff and a lot of annoyance. And furthermore, if you've been paying attention to what the Kubernetes people have been saying over the years, they've been telling you this. They've been trying really hard to say, hey, it only does this one thing, and like it doesn't do all these things you think it is. And I know it's complicated, but like you weren't supposed to be exposed to that, right? Like if you're an application developer and you're using Kubernetes and it's complicated and it's not working out for you, that's because it's not for you. But we as a community, we didn't seem, and all of us in the community, the ones selling Kubernetes, the ones boostering for it, the ones using it, thought leaders who just like anything new, like I think for many years we kind of fell down this trap of like we didn't listen to this advice. Like now I think we're finally realizing that like, oh, it's this little core thing. It doesn't do all of this stuff. And we should make sure that we don't build it from scratch. Like now that we have an integrated way of doing it. But you wouldn't learn these things if you were like if you were on the other side of the chasm and you were very early on using this technology. You would be part of the experience of going through it, which I think for most large organizations isn't helpful, right? Like, sure, you want to do it in little pockets or here or there, but when you're kind of like switch over and really have an ambition to do it everywhere, you want to choose a somewhat more mature technology than Kubernetes like 5, even 4 years ago. Maybe the one of today probably will work out well for you. So now is probably a good time to start using it. So you do, when do you want to change things, right? Like I think this is, let's see where we are, 5:23. I should have calculated the time I need to end here. Let me do that really fast. So 4:45 is 15 minutes. And if I want to talk for 40, that means 30 minutes. So really, yeah, this is where I should be wrapping up some. Let me do a quick check. I think maybe what I'll do is make this, I spent way too much time on the Kubernetes thing. I think I will actually axe these out. I don't know. I like those slides too much, but let's see. Yeah, I think that's what I'll end on this. Okay. So finally, let's go into like I think what the biggest resistance, the biggest problem seems to be, and that is like resistance to change. I mean, this has always been an issue going back to like I don't know. What did they call it? Corporate re-engineering or something like back in the 90s. You remember, if you were alive then, I kind of remember this. Like offshoring became a new thing. And, we'd also come off of invoking dimming and lean again. I think we'd also come off of like realizing that the Toyota system and, Japanese people made better cars, or not people, Japanese companies made better cars. And so we had this idea that like, oh, we need to change the way we operate. So change management as a science is very well studied. Like there's a lot of models for it, but still when I talk with organizations and people about, DevOps and getting better at software, it's a huge thing they struggle with. How do we actually change, right? Like I was saying, we have all these models. You can find any model that you want. Like nowadays, you can go study up on the coal miners and the socio-technical systems. And, you can go read John Willis's, dimming book, which it's not a prescriptive book about what to do, but it will give you an appreciation of another philosophy of how organizations should operate and just life in general, or whatever. You can look at all the great books, right? And there's also a lot put into like the process, how you engineer and manage change. And I think one of the most important things that I see people like not addressing enough is Well, I don't know if they don't address this enough, but like it's something that I think if we started to address it would work out. Is that like if you look at the motivations for organizations to change versus the motivations for all the individuals in that organization to change, they're often not the same at all, right? So an organization, I'll talk about it in business terms, but you can imagine the nonprofit government organization terms. They are interested in changing, again, for a profit, to survive competition, to increase revenue, to lower costs, to increase shareholder price or stock price, right? So they want the organization to run better. They want to make more money, all of this kind of stuff, right? But if you look at each individual in that organization below the kind of like executive level, I'll give you a fun way to check who's in this group or not. Like they don't care if the organization runs better. I mean, that's very cynical to say, but probably the first thing they care about is having their job, right? And you can work to some, second order things like in order to have my job, I want the organization to thrive. But really, like, if they're in their job and they've been there for a while, like things have gone well, right? Like everything seems to work. So why would they change over? And when you come in, you're going to change the organization around to make things better, to address productivity, to increase developer productivity. Like that's not really a good motivation for developers at all. And you can see, there's the recent, they should have called it Spice instead of Space. That would have been fun. But you can see the recent, there's a lot of developer productivity talk. And the Space kind of thinking, it goes through, what kind of those satisfying well-being things, that kind of contrasts activities and outcomes. It's a good framework for understanding the benefits of changing, right? And you can see there's an older McKinsey study where it shows what individuals like. Now, this misalignment makes it hard to change organizations because the executives, the people engineering the change, like they can't really do very much. They can't go change the way everyone works. They can mandate it. But in order to do it well, each of those individuals has to be motivated to do it. And I think the way you can ferret out this misalignment is generally the people who are given equity in the company are a lot more motivated to see the company succeed, because if the company succeeds, their equity, their stock increases in value. If the company does not succeed, it lowers in value. Now, this is why executives really care about developer productivity and all those things. But in your organization, I would do a quick check. If you know what the letters RSU stand for, then you might be in an organization. That almost sounds like a redneck joke. That's kind of like a Silicon Valley bro joke. If you know what RSU stands for, you might be in an organization where you're aligned with what your employees want to do, right? But if you don't know what that means you're not getting large stock grants, right? You're not part of the success of the organization other than just being employed in it. And I think that difference in motivations for change drives a lot of this, right? You go to the individuals and they're like, yeah, like, do I get more money if I change? What do I get? And like, if you don't know the value of going through that change, then it's going to be difficult to get over that hump of fearing change. Now, the way that I see organizations getting over this is you start with that premise of like, the way we're going to motivate people to change. Let's see. Yeah, I think if I cut out the stuff, I'll be able to hit it just on time here. The way we're going to motivate people to change is we need to build trust in operating in that new way, and trust that their lives are going to be better, their work-life balance or whatever, but that at least their 9-to-5 life is going to be easier and better for them, right? If we remove all this toil, if we automate stuff, they work less on the weekends, they're happier in what they're doing, it's less stressful. You even get that feel of like, I've done a good job, I shipped software that works, or I've supported the developers who are shifting software that works. But you have to use some marketing, some word of mouth to do this, right? You've got to find some initial teams, build up success with them, learn how it works in that organization, and then start to do marketing, word of mouth marketing, have those developers, those infrastructure people, those individuals, these people who previously feared change, talk to the other people who feared change and say like, yeah, if you change over to doing things in this new way, you will get benefits. Not just monetary ones, if you're lucky enough to know what an RSU is, but you will get benefits just because your quality of life will improve, right? And so if you want to motivate individuals to change, either give them money if they're successful, give them that kind of equity, have them share in the same success as the executives do, which I don't think most organizations do, if I understand all the numbers correctly, or really focus on, never mind if you've increased their productivity, never mind the business outcomes that you have, just focus on how it makes their lives better. And I think you can start to see how that kind of like word of mouth, that building up slow momentum and then slowly spreading out that word of mouth to more people really kind of spreads that change out better. As you can see in that, when that kind of seeding worked in these two organizations. So I'm going to skip over that stuff. So that's kind of a quick tour through some of the sort of things I'm trying to document there, right? And the whole point of going through that is to try to kind of like salvage this, like, I don't know what we're doing here. We seem to be repeating ourselves over and over again. Is like, well, let's just focus on these easy fundamental things. Put CI/CD in place, figure out how to motivate individuals to change by just telling them why things are better for them. Don't get so freaked out about change or die things, and on, right? And I think it kind of gets to a more comfortable area of like, if you're struggling with improving, right? Like, try to focus on doing less, starting smaller, and like taking a long time, right? Like, remove this kind of urgency and give yourself time to just like figure out what's going on, go back and read the manual, put some fundamental practices in place, and it'll probably be fine. I don't really like this ending now. I need a better end slide. I don't really know what it should be, but we'll see. But, actually do it this time. Maybe that's what I should, yeah, okay. Better end slide. What should it be? It's like, I'll list all the stuff. Then actually do it this time. Yep. So let's pretend like these are all the things, blah, blah, blah. But I think what it's okay for us to start thinking and doing is like, we should actually do it this time. Like all of these best practices that we know, whether it's, whether you hear it from extreme programming or Scrum or, DevOps or ITIL or, from the coal mines or whatever, it all sounds good. Do it. Right, and then see if that if you're not improving, try actually putting it in place. So, thanks. It was this is a very helpful therapy session for me. I hope you can send bills to my Dutch insurance if you know how to navigate that system. But if you like that, you should subscribe to my newsletter. I think it's great. I'll be around the rest of the day here. You can come visit me at the table we have, and I'm generally easy to get a hold of. I don't always respond to things, but I'm always interested in talking about these things and more. So enjoy the rest of the conference. All right. So I ended at 5:34, right, which is 3 minutes over 45 minutes, right? If I started at 4:45. Here, let me switch over to just my big head. So if I started at 4:45, I think the math is correct here, then that should mean that that's 15 minutes to get you up to 5, and you got 34 minutes over 5. So if you add 15 to 30, this is how I do math. It's stupid. If you add 15 to 30, that gets you 45. And you add that 4 back in, and that gets you 49, which is right up against 50 minutes. I've got 60 minutes allotted. And if I cut out those saying slides, I think it will definitely work. So I think that works out well. Well, I'm going to be traveling around a lot over September, all in Europe places. So next week, I'm going to be in both. Is this next week? Both in Berlin at the StatConf, where I'll be giving this talk as well, which will be nice. I'll get to tune it, and then I'm going to be at SRE Day in London, where I think I'm giving the platform engineering talk, which would be great. I gave that talk today during an O'Reilly Super Stream, and boy, it was a reminder that you should never read the comments. There were actually many great comments. There was actually really good questions. I had a good time. If you have an O'Reilly subscription or Safari or whatever through paying for it yourself or your company, you should go look up the Super Stream because the questions were great. They were fun to answer. And my colleague Whitney Lee presented as well. And I haven't seen her present in a while, even though she presents all the time. She's great. She's so much fun to like be an audience member for. But you should go look that up. Then after that, I'm going to be in Croatia, of all places, at the Shift conference. This reminds me, I need to respond to someone, a blogger journalist, who asked me some questions. Ugh, always things to get to. There's something about the thought leadership life as well that I appreciate in a lot of my other thought leaders, who I always think like, you sure don't seem to show up to a lot of things. Is that they actually do show up to a lot of things. They just like don't spend their time answering other people's questions and doing their homework for them, which I don't know. I'm of a mixed feel. I feel like it's not so much that I shouldn't be doing things like that. It's that I need to the point of my talk, I need to do them. It should really only take about 20 minutes to answer those things. But despite the way I think of myself, I think I have that problem where like, I want to make sure I wouldn't say whenever I'm given a task, I want to do it perfectly. What I want to do is do a good enough job that I don't have to do it again. The way I think about it a lot is I don't ever want to get in trouble. That's like the number one thing that motivates most decisions in my life is I just don't want to get in trouble. So that causes a lot of bad behavior, or not helpful behavior. But so if you have some task you need to do and you're like, ugh, I haven't figured out the perfect way to respond to this, maybe you should just imperfectly do it and get rid of it. I think that's perfectly fine if you have other stuff going on in your life. And then I think I have a week off after that, and then I'll be at the Monktoberfest in Portland, Maine, which is not, unfortunately, I'm not speaking there because by the time I submitted, they were chock full up. But they said they would. Steven said he'd take one of my talks for next year. We'll see if I'm doing the thing where I look at the microphone instead of the camera. But we'll see if, who knows what will happen in a year. But I should respond and be like, sure, put me on the docket for next year. Bully. So I'll be there if you're going to be at the Monktoberfest, whenever that is, the first week of October. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Well, I enjoy doing these stream things here. I think I need to start doing some where I experiment with my chat DM stuff. If you're interested, I alluded to it in the presentation in my adventures in rediscovering Dungeons and Dragons. It's great to use the AI stuff with it, but you can go to eldergrove.quest. What a domain name. And I actually had a post today where I went over like my recent experience and experiments using ChatDM as a DM. And I think it's going a little bit better than I would have assumed. The critical problem with it is ChatGPT has a very short-term memory. So after about even 30 minutes or an hour, like it loses track of what's been happening in your adventure, which is not good, because you rely on that. Let alone like over weeks and weeks, it just loses track of the campaign setting that you have, the characters, the events that have happened. So I've been trying to figure out a way to like remind it and kind of retrain it on that stuff. And I tried to look into using like Olama or whatever, and like I don't know, I don't program anymore. And also it was not very good at some of the responses it was doing. But if there was some way to like have more control, to kind of like locally control stuff. Like it's almost like, I guess what I would want ideally is like every time I start up a session, it should just like load up everything that I've done. And I don't know if that would cost me like $50 a session or something. I mean, you get up against some costs, but like whatever. That's really at this point, the number one barrier for using ChatGPT to do dungeon mastering is its memory isn't long enough. And then once you solve that, you could get to the next problem, which is it's just not very imaginative and creative, which I think you could solve with a long enough memory. You can just kind of tell it what to do. But anyways, if you go to eldergrove.quest, it's the most recent post there, and you can look at that. It'd be great to hear what y'all are doing with that, because it's a real treat to be able to sit down. It really brings together, doubling down on that slide some more. I hate that metaphor because I don't like playing games, but like rat holing, talking about that more. Like what's fun about using ChatGPT for dungeon mastering is that like normally this stuff is all in my head, right? Like the world building, the characters, even like when my mind's an idle, sometimes I shift to just like running an adventure in my head, in actually the world and with the characters that I had way back in junior high. It's kind of cute and adorable or sad, depending on how cynical you are. But what you can do with ChatGPT is if you get it in a good state, you almost like start to write the story with it. Like, it's fun to have a co-author doing it, and it's documented. And if you're very comfortable with text, with writing and reading writing as I am, it's almost a preferable way than doing it live action, right? Like, it's interesting. And the hallucinating, the making stuff up that ChatGPT does, actually, as one of the more recent papers, academic papers on using ChatGPT for dungeon mastering went over, that making shit up, that hallucinating, is actually exactly what you want. Like, it results in interesting storytelling and fantasy stuff. Sometimes it's stupid, but it actually comes up with some interesting stuff that isn't factual or based on the facts that you've given it. That's cool. So it's a good way to take advantage of that. Well, anyways, if you've watched this far and you don't subscribe yet to get notified when I'll have another Wastebook live stream, you should definitely do that. And I mean, as I said, the newsletter.cote.io. And I don't know. Also, if you watch this far, I've gotten a little bit of feedback here and there, which is encouraging. But if you have something positive to say, you should tell me, because it's that's a way you can be nice today. And then check that off your list, and you can be mean the rest of the day or just neutral. But thanks for the people who have been watching and mentioning it. It's encouraging. And I'll see everyone next time. Bye bye. Oh, let me do my magic outro. Bye bye.